we're back with video 3. So continuing on with this issue of how does a presidential candidate or any particular candidate, but especially the presidential candidate, win the primary so he can move on and have a viable chance in the general election. Let me go back just to this chart again. So remember, in the primary election, the moderates as a group tend not to vote. This does not mean that none of them vote. What it means is these people out on the edge, both the liberals and the Republicans out on the edge, they vote more often than these people in the middle. This is why the more liberal of the Democrats usually gets nominated as president, wins their primary, and why the more conservative of the Republicans get nominated or wins their candidate. So you can ask yourself, why did Bernie Sanders do so well? It's because these people vote in the primary elections. That's why he does so well, and that's why the more moderate Democrats were getting worried over that whole issue. Okay, so back to these 4 components of strategy. Tone. Tone is the idea of what kind of approach is the candidate going to take. Is he or she going to take the candidate of a positive tone, build themselves up what they plan to do as president or will do as president, versus negative, meaning attack their opponent? Which approach do they take? Sadly, it is the negative campaigning that tends to work. The fear-mongering tends to work. Mitt Romney ran a very positive campaign for a long time against Obama. It just wasn't enough. You've got to run, to at least a degree, a negative campaign. You've got to point out their weaknesses. It's not enough to say what you're going to do as president. The theme cannot be overstated as to what an important impact that has. So the theme is a simple appealing idea that can be repeated over and over again. So Obama's theme was change. The nice thing about this theme for Obama was, well, we're just come off of the Great Recession, or we're still trying to get out of the Great Recession, and change becomes an easy theme to have because it's vague, but people want something different. Obama didn't say what he'd do, but there was just going to be change. And it's an appealing idea. It's an idea that's easy to state. Leaves it up to interpretation to the individual as to what that means. So it can be very positive for individuals. Trump's theme, "Make America Great Again," was an interesting theme as well, because it appealed to his base, but also could reach out and grab the middle. We're going to talk about that when we're talking about target here in a second. So timing. When is it that you try to crush your opponents? Do you try to crush your opponents early on in the primary, or do you attempt to save up cash for the general election? So if you look at Joe Biden in the 2020 election, Joe Biden really didn't get too upset that he wasn't winning these early primaries. As we talked about in previous lecture, you need to win the early primaries to have money coming into your campaign, because people want to back a winner. They want to put their money with somebody who has a chance at winning the campaign, and then they'll be able to get some influence with that individual. Is the idea. And so when is it that you spend your money? It's also important to win those early primaries, because that's when you get more money coming in if you're winning. If Joe Biden would have kept losing, if he would have lost in South Carolina, it's just less likely that he would have had enough money coming in to be a viable candidate in the subsequent primaries. So that timing is a big deal. Target. This cannot be, again, it is like with theme, it cannot be overstated. Who will you target as a presidential candidate? Who will you go after? So again, let's go back to this chart here. So you've got to have a theme that will allow you to reach out and grab your base. So if you're a Democrat, you've got to have some theme that's going to allow you to to grab these liberal voters. If you're a Republican, you've got to have some theme that will allow you to grab these voters. So, for instance, take Ronald Reagan's theme. Yes, I realize it was way back in 1980, but the classic example of how he had a theme. He didn't think Americans were taxed too much. Excuse me. He didn't think Americans were taxed too little. He thought they were taxed too much. And so that statement, that kind of idea would resonate with conservatives, where that statement wouldn't resonate with liberals. They say, no, taxes more. We need to make these billionaires pay for everything. So that allowed him to reach out and grab his base, and that idea that you're taxed too much is going to be very appealing to the moderates. So not only did it allow him to grab his base, it allowed him to reach out and grab the middle. And that's what we mean when we say target. Which voters will you target? Which will allow you in the primary election to grab your base over here if you're a conservative, but then reach out and grab the moderates in the middle if you're whichever side you're from. You've got to have that base. So for instance, in the 1970s, one of the presidential candidates argued for the legalization of marijuana. That's just barely happened. That was 50 years ago. That certainly allowed him to grab his base, but it didn't allow him to reach out and grab the middle. They voted against him and voted against him big. So all this, what we've just talked about here at the end of the last video and the beginning of this video, that's really what your essay is. You need to understand that there's two different elections, and to win the first election, win the primary election, you've got to have that theme that will allow you to reach out and grab your base, but then allow you to target those in the middle, reach out and grab them so you can win the general election. Hope that all made sense, since nobody can ask questions. All right. So to win the primary, a candidate must mobilize the activists. What does mobilize the activists actually even mean? You've got to get them to donate dollars. The only way you can get them to donate. Oh, now remember, who are the activists? The activists, again, are going to be the liberals, elites, if you're a Democrat, and not necessarily elites, but the liberals on the far left. And if you're Republican, the conservatives on the right. You've got to get them to donate money, to volunteer time, attend caucuses, campaign, get out there and knock on doors for you, do some grassroots stuff. And this, you've got to have the organization, you've got to have that support. And so again, this is the idea that we've just stated here. In order to win, you're going to have to appeal to, the Democrat is going to have to appeal to the more liberal Democrat if that candidate wants to win. If you're a conservative, you've got to appeal to the conservatives. That's what we've been talking about. All right. So again, this is really still the essay. The candidates in the general election. So in the primary election, they're talking. If you're a liberal, you're talking about these liberal positions that you take to appeal to those the people on the left. If you're Republican, you're talking about conservative positions to woo those people on the right. But in the general election, you must move to the ideological center to appeal to the moderates, because if you can't appeal to the moderates, you won't win in the general election, because it's these people vote in the primary elections, but everybody votes in the general election. So in the general elections, you've got to move to the center if you're going to win the general election. If you can't move to the center with your campaign, with your theme, with your target, it's not going to happen for you. You will not win the presidency. All right. So if you have two extreme of positions in the general election, you will never be able to move to the ideological center to win the nomination. So that individual I talked about, I didn't give you his name before. It was George McGovern, who was running against Richard Nixon, who wanted to legalize marijuana. He wanted amnesty for the draft dodgers. This was during the Vietnam era. And Nixon in the general election in 1972 portrayed McGovern as a leftist, and he won big. So if you cannot move to the ideological center, you just won't be able to win the election. All right, that's it for this one.